Welcome to the Capital Forum interview series. My name is Tanya Rao, and I'm a senior correspondent with the Capital Forum. And joining me today is Leigh Oliver, co-chair of the Healthcare and Life Sciences and head of U.S. Antitrust at Clifford Chance. Leigh, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
For starters, we're a year into the second Trump administration. The administration has taken on a bunch of new priorities and approaches. Can you walk us through some key differences that you've noticed in the healthcare and life sciences space?
Sure. I think what we're seeing with this administration and the enforcers at the Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice is a bit more of a pragmatic and business-friendly approach to antitrust enforcement. They're pursuing fewer, I would say, novel theories of antitrust enforcement that may have been picked up in the last administration. And they're kind of returning to a focus on core issues in terms of what's the competitive effect in markets, defining markets, frankly, in a more traditional sense, as has been done historically. And yet at the same time, we're seeing them continue to look at, particularly in healthcare life sciences, the impact of transactions on innovation and competition and innovation. So I would say that is something that maybe is carried forward and been consistent from the last administration. But I don't think that's like a novel theory. I think that is a actual traditional theory of like competition exists in the innovation space. So we've definitely seen them pursue that. But otherwise, I would say it's been a much more return to sort of practical approaches, engagement, and traditional look at antitrust, at least in healthcare and life sciences.
Absolutely. Thank you for breaking that down. We've seen a step back in litigated mergers, but one area where we've seen continuous interest of the FTC is healthcare. At the Georgetown conference last year, FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson said to expect heightened scrutiny of healthcare deals and conduct. Do you think we've seen this play out in enforcement action since there? And how does that factor into deals that you're putting together?
Yeah, I think actually healthcare is a space where there's been a pretty consistent approach across administrations to antitrust enforcement in terms of it being a priority. Healthcare is an issue that touches everybody in this country and is incredibly important to, the consumers, and it's a huge part of our economy. And so it has been a consistent priority over the decades I've been practicing for both federal agencies to focus on healthcare transactions across the sector. So life sciences, pharma, medical devices, providers, and health insurers, like all of that has been something that I think consistently administrations have looked at as important to making sure we're getting it right when it comes to competition enforcement. In terms of what Chair Ferguson said, I think he has really just been consistent in that approach, much like his predecessors. I think the difference is probably the way they're actually looking at some of these issues, but whether they're going to bring an enforcement action or not, I think in healthcare, you can sort of count on them to bring it where there is a real competitive issue because it's such an important part of our economy.
Absolutely. I do want to discuss some deals that we've seen in the space. We have the FTC blocked Edward Science's acquisition of Geneval. We have GTCR Surmodics. How should we be thinking about and learning from these deals?
Yeah, so I think these are two deals that show that actually this FTC in particular is not going to step back from opportunities to bring enforcement actions where they find them necessary, right? So, and I think a focus on the medical device space, which are two examples of, is an area where this FTC is looking at like this innovation issue that I alluded to before, and the importance of continuing to foster development of new technologies in the life sciences space is going to be a priority. And so, if there's concentrated markets and transactions and consolidation occurring in those markets, which actually is like a hallmark of a lot of the medical device and pharma space, because it's really there's a lot of capital investment that goes into developing new technologies. So you're going to see like an opportunity maybe for enforcement in those areas. How is that impacting how I'm advising clients? I think it's important when you're going into a transaction and you're in a more concentrated market and what we're advising clients to be aware of and to look at and to really understand as best as possible is, what does the whole landscape look like, right? Like, so what else is in the pipeline for others that are developing products and innovations in that same space? Who are those competitors? What kind of funding do they have behind them? And what's the likelihood of those coming to market in competition with whatever is already existing in the space?
At the Georgetown conference, Chairman Ferguson also talked about 11th hour fixes and where companies propose divestitures or remedies only after the agency files a lawsuit. But it looks like courts may be taking a more lenient approach on that front. How should companies prepare on that front?
Yeah, so I think it puts the FTC or the DOJ in a somewhat difficult position if parties are in front of them and don't propose a remedy until they've been sued. It's sort of a process issue in some ways. And so where there is an opportunity to resolve a competitive issue, that should be done, and ideally can be done before litigation is filed. I think a lot of parties maybe don't sort of believe that there's going to be litigation filed, and so they try and hold out for not having to do a remedy. And that's when you get into these situations where the remedy is proposed after a case is filed. The problem is when you're then in front of a court and there is a settlement on the table, regardless of when that settlement was proposed, whether it was proposed before litigation or after, a court has to take that into consideration. And so it's a different evaluation that the court is then doing in that circumstance. So, I mean, frankly, I've been involved in merger litigation where the remedy is really in front of the court and was not fully in front of the agency sometimes. And I think it's ultimately, then the court has to decide whether that remedy is sufficient.
Absolutely. I also want to talk about DOJ because we've talked about the FTC deals. We
Sure.
did see United Health and Medicines last year. We're still learning about AAGSFE and how he's going to be thinking about mergers, but are there any early signals or actions that we should be watching out for?
I mean, one thing I think he said, maybe it was yesterday in some remarks he gave, was that he's really open to hearing from people, whether you have a complaint to bring to him as a consumer or a competitor, or whether you have a reason why your deal shouldn't get blocked, And so I think there's going to be, at least what he's saying is there's going to be an open door to people to come to him directly or come to him about, the narrative around their deal or the narrative around maybe a complaint that they might have. That's a bit unusual, to be honest. I think that there's a typical, pathway before you get to the acting AG to talk about the issues and hash out whether there's a real competitive concern. But we'll see what happens. I think what we're probably likely to see is what we've seen a bit of already in this administration at DOJ, which is a real willingness to find settlements rather than go to the mat in litigation. I mean, we are continually seeing, even on non-merger litigation, like the Live Nation case, settlements happening and DOJ being willing to negotiate, frankly, with parties.
Well, not directly on Live Nation, but I did want to move to state enforcement. We have seen states being more involved now. What can practitioners do to guide clients through an increasingly complex environment when we also have state filings with federal filings?
Yeah, so this is actually something that I think my experience in the healthcare space is probably informs other types of non-healthcare transactions as well, and the approach you take with states, because for a long time, many states have had healthcare transaction review statutes where you've needed to go to the state AGs and at least notify them or engage with them on transactions. And they have, been more involved, frankly, especially on the healthcare provider side of the sector, in looking at independently or in coordination with the federal enforcers, whether there's going to be a competitive effect in a relevant market in the healthcare within a state. So I think my approach then and now continues to be where there's something that's directly impacting a state, and it's going to have a local effect, whether it be a local effect on jobs or actually on the consumer downstream. I think it's important to early on engage with the states. I think the practice of trying to hold the states off and hope they don't do anything is really not going to be effective, particularly in this day and age where the states are realizing that there may be remedies and settlements happening at the federal level that is not good enough for a state enforcer. And so I think it's important to engage early, strategize around what that looks like. It's not that every state has to be, given lots of attention, because frankly, the effects may be pretty minimal in certain places, but prioritize the ones where it really is going to matter to that state because of the consumers that are involved or the labor force that's involved.
Absolutely. Looking into your crystal ball, what are we going to be talking about next year at spring meeting in the healthcare and life sciences space, or even broadly?
I think we're going to see, hopefully, some innovative new products in the provider and insurer space, and maybe some more vertical either collaboration or integration in that space, which hopefully injects a little bit more competition into those markets that historically, and now I'm going back sort of some years, were pretty dominated by a few players. I think we're seeing a real shift, probably driven by regulatory actions occurring not at antitrust, but in the healthcare sector, that may be prompting sort of new ways and new models of care and of also delivering care and reimbursing for it and things like that. So I think we might be talking a little bit about that, vertical integration and new developments and products in that space.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. This was great. We really appreciate you speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.